Hello and welcome again to Left to It All. I am your host, C.M. Phillips. This is a show that tries to cover and understand issues that affect us all. Healthcare, housing, workers' rights, foreign and domestic policies, human rights and economics, all through a very critical lens of class analysis. Hold on, I think we're a little bit crooked. Oh, there we go. You don't look so crooked. Today, I will be continuing with part 2 on propaganda. In part 1, we briefly covered 3 works on the topic. Edward Bernays' book, Propaganda, the Powell Memorandum, and the Trilateral Commission's report, The Crisis of Democracy. What all these works demonstrated was how to utilize propaganda to influence the public, creating a passive and subservient society to prevent, in their words, the excess of democracy. A society where the citizens of that democracy create movements for social and economic progressive change, which, when implemented, actually help the majority by methods of wealth redistribution. In other words, helping the majority of people in need instead of enriching the wealthy few is an excess of democracy. Now, there's no way I can make a show on propaganda without touching upon the Nazi propaganda machine. However, I just want to focus on how Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels used propaganda far beyond anything ever done before, utilizing everything at their disposal from mythology, symbols, iconography, posters, banners, speeches, rallies and marches, radio and cinema, both radio and cinema being relatively new at the time, to mesmerize German society from one of the most progressive countries in the world into a regressive, racist, ultra-nationalistic, anti-Semitic, xenophobic, horrifically violent, and genocidal society. Hitler, whose fascist ideology became refined, specifically after World War I and during his short time in prison for a failed coup to overthrow the government where he wrote Mein Kampf, came to fruition as the Great Depression hit the global market. Germany, which was hit hardest economically due to the crippling reparations forced on them after signing the Treaty of Versailles, dramatically changed its politics. This enabled the Nazi Party to go from a fringe minority to what would become the only party in Germany under the dictatorship. Hitler himself designed what would become the Nazi swastika and flag. He was also a talented orator, producing speeches that would enthrall the masses. Goebbels, the Reich Minister of Propaganda, also known for his skill in public speaking, took control over all media, arts, and information. In particular, the use of radio and film. Film was especially useful as the captured visual concept of propaganda for the Nazis. The film Triumph of the Will worked as an amazing propagandizing objective, rousing German patriotism, militarism, and the deification of Adolf Hitler. A quote from Goebbels: "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and/or military consequences of the lie. It is thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to represent dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Today, just like the not-too-distant past, the news media is heavily relied upon for information. It needs to cover many different topics like politics, war, medicine, science, or the environment. However, in today's world, the public is bombarded with information. It's just bombarded with information. All driven by different narratives created by different corporations. If world events appear as though they are random, it is because the narrative given has no historical insight to give it meaning. If it seems random, it's by design. In his book, A Short History of Progress, the Canadian author Ronald Wright makes the assertion: in times of war or crisis, power is easily stolen from the many by the few on a promise of security. The more elusive or imaginary the foe, the better for manufacturing consent. Often it is said that the first casualty of war is the truth. A great example of this was the United States after the 9/11 attacks. The media helped drive the frenzy of anti-Muslim racism and hyper-nationalism through a massive fear campaign. This partially allowed the Bush administration to lie its way into invading Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with 9/11, over non-existent weapons of mass destruction or chemical weapons that UN weapons inspectors had already destroyed close to a decade before with the help of the Iraqi government. Former Marine and UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter in 2000 stated that Iraq possessed no significant WMD capabilities. The New York Times described Ritter as, quote, the loudest and most credible skeptic of the Bush administration's contention that Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction. Like most critics speaking truth to power, he was drowned out by a constant fear campaign by the media, carefully controlling the message to the people that be afraid, be afraid. The terrorists are everywhere. One of the best-known writings on the subject of media propaganda is Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky's book, Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media. Written in 1988, the book was a glaring analysis of how the media is used by those in power to control society through misinformation and the omission of relevant facts. Quote, the picture of the world that is presented to the public has only the remotest relation. I already screwed it up. The picture of the world that is presented to the public has only the remotest relation to reality. The truth of the matter is buried under edifice after edifice of lies upon lies. It's all been a marvelous success from the point of view in deterring the threat of democracy, achieved under conditions of freedom. They continue, the mass media serve as a system for communicating messages and symbols to the general populace. It is their function to amuse, entertain, and inform, and to inculcate, I can't say that word, and to inculcate individuals with the values, beliefs, and codes of behavior that will integrate them into the institutional structures of the larger society. In a world of concentrated wealth and major conflicts of class interest, to fulfill this role requires systemic propaganda. The beauty of the system, however, is that such dissent and inconvenient information are kept within bounds and at the margins, so that while their presence shows that the system is not monolithic, they are not large enough to interfere unduly with the domination of the official agenda. Of course, this was a book written in 1988, and today, with the consolidation of corporate media into the hands of only 6 companies, we can safely say it's closer than ever to being monolithic. They continue, the essential ingredients of our propaganda model, or set of new filters, fall under the following headings. 1. The size, concentrated ownership, owner, wealth, and profit orientation of the dominant mass media firms. 2. Advertising as the primary income source of the mass media. 3. The reliance of media on information provided by government, business, and experts funded and approved by these primary sources and agents of power. Flack, strong criticism, as a means of disciplining the media. And 5, anti-communism as a national religion and control mechanism. Chomsky writes, propaganda campaigns in general have been closely attuned to elite interests. The Red Scare of 1919 to 1920 have served well to abort the union organizing drive that followed World War I. The Truman-McCarthy Red Scare helped inaugurate the Cold War and the permanent war economy, and it also served to weaken the progressive coalition of the New Deal years. The chronic focus on the plight of Soviet dissidents, on enemy killings in Cambodia, and on the Bulgarian connection helped weaken the Vietnam Syndrome being, Americans opposing the Vietnam War. Justify a huge arms buildup and a more aggressive foreign policy, and divert attention from upward redistribution of income that was at the heart of Reagan's domestic economic program. We can notice a historical trend here. The Red Scare after World War I, when people moved towards progressive values. The communist threat after World War II, and the McCarthyism that followed during the 1950s to dissuade an egalitarian society. And today, with the new Cold War, another, wait for it, communist threat. One that seems rather odd considering neither Russia or China are communist countries. In fact, both countries are very much capitalist. Even if China's government calls itself communist and Russia has a communist party, it would be like calling the U.S. a socialist, because here we have the political party called the Democratic Socialists of America, or that we're fascists because of the extreme views of white nationalists and Christian fundamentalists. These threats are mostly engineered to mislead and distract the American people from the very real issues facing our country and the world in general. A quote from George Orwell: "Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind." For instance, inflation, supply chain shortages, and the war in Ukraine. These are clear ways to distract people's attention away from the fact that the global economic hegemony the United States once had since the end of World War II is now in decline. All empires rise, all empires fall. Much like the Roman Empire that placed all its wealth into military expansion, ignoring the needs of their people, the U.S. has done the same, clearly not learning the lessons of the past. Working people and the poor are taken in by party politics, not realizing that the democracy they have is not intended to truly help them in the first place. That both so-called political parties work together for the same goals, to work to fulfill the desires of corporations. That both parties almost unanimously agree on war is not by accident. When the arms industry profits, the politicians may pay lip service to the needs of society, but often, once in power, completely abandon those policy agendas until re-election time. Speaking to societal needs, Chomsky writes, "There is little reason to believe that they, the working class, would not like to understand why they are working harder with stagnant or declining incomes, have inadequate medical care at high costs, and what is being done in their name all over the world. If they are not getting much information on these topics, the propaganda model can explain why. The sovereigns who control the media choose not to offer such material." This is also tied to the theater of electoral politics. The old saying, divide and conquer, comes to mind. And in today's world, dividing society is a crucial aspect in maintaining control. If the working class and poor are divided, then the ruling elite can continue to steal the wealth of the nation, deny them their rights, and steal their democracy, all while being able to blame the other party, while both parties participate in the action with little understanding and therefore resistance from the public. However, if the working class starts to realize that their petty differences are not nearly as important as their shared needs, they just might start working together to fight to improve their circumstances. They might start thinking crazy ideas, like the government should give them free universal health care during an ongoing global pandemic. But let's not forget that this would be a threat to democracy. In Edward Bernay's 1952 book titled Public Relations, he writes, "It is impossible to overestimate the importance of engineering consent. It affects almost every aspect of our daily lives. When used for social purposes, it is among our most valuable contributions to the efficient functioning of society. But the techniques can be subverted. Demagogues can use them for anti-democratic purposes as successfully as those who employ them for socially desirable ends." In his book, Giants, the Global Power Elite, Peter Phillips, the former director of the Project Censored, writes, in 2017, in a 2017 update on the propaganda model, Edward Herman wrote, just a few months before his recent passing, that mainstream media locates their regular behavior and performance in the elite-dominated corporate structures and relationships, not in journalists' news-gathering practices or any supposed role as an independent watchdog serving the general public interest. Herman goes on to say that the main development in mainstream media over the last 30 years has been the emergence of the internet, which undermined printed news, resulting in a 60% drop in the newspaper workforce between 1990 and 2016, as well as a drop in advertisement revenue from $65 billion in 2000 to $18 billion in 2015. Alphabet, Google, has been the largest beneficiary of internet advertisement revenue, garnering more than $75 billion annually as of 2016. Herman writes that these internet gains, Google and Facebook, are in the surveillance and marketing, spying and selling business. They use micro-technology to identify and sell to advertisers full dossiers on the personal habits, relationships, and tastes of vast numbers of people. We should note that governments, political campaigns, and intelligence agency are also in the market for this trove of personal information. Every aspect of our lives has been monetized, but do you receive compensation? Does it even occur to you, to the people, that they should own their own information? That which is used by corporations to market and sell for their own profit. Not really. This is where propaganda of the early 21st century has changed from the 20th century, commodifying people in a very different way. Not exactly slaves, not exactly serfs under feudalism, but something that falls within that category. For we are only as free as those who rule us allow, or as German novelist and playwright Jonathan Van Gogh wrote, the best slave is the one who thinks he is free. I'd like to end with a quote from Sheldon S. Walden, the author of Democracy Incorporated, Management Democracy, and the Specter of Inverted Totalitarianism. He writes, anti-democracy, executive predominance, and elite rule are basic elements of inverted totalitarianism. Anti-democracy does not take the form of overt attacks upon the idea of government by the people. No. Instead, politically, it means encouraging what I have earlier dubbed civic demobilization, conditioning an electorate to be aroused for a brief spell, controlling its attention span, and then encouraging distraction or apathy. The intense pace of work and the extended workday combined with job insecurity is a formula for political demobilization, for privatizing the citizenry. It works indirectly. Citizens are encouraged to distrust their government and politicians, to concentrate upon their own interests, to begrudge their taxes, and to exchange active involvement for symbolic gratifications of patriotism, collective self-righteousness, and military prowess. Above all, depoliticization is promoted through societies being enveloped in an atmosphere of collective fear and of individual powerlessness, fear of terrorists, loss of jobs, the uncertainties of pension plans, soaring health costs, and rising educational expenses. This concludes part 2 on propaganda. I thank you for watching, and if you like this content, please like and subscribe. And I will see you soon.